Before we start, I just want to begin with a huge thank you to Cameron, who is on staff here at UUCA. Cameron, will you wave so we can all be so appreciative? And Art, who is one of our unbelievable and amazing volunteers. Cameron is running our sound. Art is running our video. Without them, nothing would happen here. We are going to record. And Art, I think if you want to push it to Facebook, let's do it, right? That's phenomenal. It's already going. Hi, everybody. That's great. Story of my life. Cameras are already rolling. I am Reverend Amanda Poppy. I am so honored to be the senior minister serving here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington. And I'm especially honored, and actually, as I've been telling people all morning, slightly intimidated, to be moderating this panel of pretty illustrious people, illustrious in many ways, and the various things that they do in Arlington, and in who they are, and how they are living their truth. And so I'm super psyched to have them all here, and to have them here as part of our, what on staff we call QA, I like to call it QA squared. Queer and questioning awareness and acceptance, but QA squared seems like it's a cool math thing, so that's good too. So I am going to just introduce folks as we go by, and ask you to. Well, I think I can do in order. Yeah, sure. Let's see if I can manage that. I'm going to just keep scrolling around. We are super excited to have Jay with us. Jay's pronouns are they, them. Jay identifies as non-binary, queer teenager. They love music, listening and writing to music, books, and random other assorted things. That was like my favorite bio, Jay. Just want to mention that. Next to Jay, also a part of this congregation, is Amy Dreyer. Amy Dreyer's pronouns are she, her, and Aya. Amy is a mom, a Unitarian Universalist, an OWL. OWL is Our Whole Lives, which is our comprehensive sexuality education program, which we offer at different ages and for a full year in the 8th grade year. It's hopefully, obviously, an inclusive sex-positive program, an OWL facilitator and a mental health educator, and she has a practice in Woodbridge, which includes adolescents' mental health and LGBTQIA+ primary care. We're excited to have you here. Next to Amy is Corinne Saunders, who's a psychologist who works with neurodivergent and gender-expansive youth and young adults. Their private practice specializes in the individual therapy, group therapy, and mentorship programs for autistic and trans non-binary teens. Woo-hoo! Next, we have Shaya Mohanty Ortiz, pronouns she, her, hers, and Aya, who's the mother of a transgender man and a cisgender man. She was a Spanish instructor for 22 years, working with Fairfax County as a community health worker, and now as a care coordinator for children who do not have access to Medicaid nor other forms of insurance. She facilitates a monthly support group for parents of gender-expansive children. She's been an active advocate for the trans community since 2015. She's done training as a peer recovery specialist. She's certified in mental health first aid. She serves on the board of directors for the Transgender Education Association. And then when she's not working, which does not appear to be at any moment, she also does photography and writing, so that's awesome. And I will include, she just wrote a slam poem for the transgender community called I Just Wanna Pee. Next to Chaya is Dr. Daryl Sampson, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Student Services for Arlington Public Schools. We are super excited to have folks from Arlington Public Schools here, since navigating school is so often a really key question that teens and their parents have as they are making their way through life, particularly with a non-binary, trans, or queer identity. So we're so excited to have you here. Thank you. And then we have Diane Kresh, who is the Director of Libraries in Arlington since 2006. When Diane agreed to come on the panel, the person organizing the panel, Betsy, said, "I feel like I've met a rock star." Throughout her career, she's mentored and championed women in the workplace to help them find and use their voices. She and her wife, 2 adult sons, are enthusiastic users of Arlington libraries. Diane loves to read, eat spicy Indian curries, and sing and accompany herself on guitar. So instead of this panel, we're actually just going to have Diane singing and accompanying herself on guitar, I feel like.
All right.
That's right. This sounds awesome. I am sort of tempted to just let you all chat podcast style, but instead I do have some questions to center us. And I'm going to be facilitating. I also will just be tracking to see, so if I've asked one person a question and you really feel like you've got a thing you want to say in there, just holler, so we'll try to keep it pretty casual. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. All right, let's see. I'm actually going to start with maybe a curveball question to get us warmed up here. So, I'm starting with you, Diane, just see if we're going to warm us up a little bit. I will say that fiction has been a huge part for me in both understanding other experiences and in understanding queer identity myself. And I wondered if you could start us off by talking about how you think fiction and therefore perhaps the library system helps us in our understanding of our own and other identities and in creating the kind of community where teens and adults and kids can thrive.
Sure. So thank you for starting with that question. It's something that's been very much on my mind for a couple of years now. You're probably aware that there are book bans going on across the country, some even close to our happy home here in Arlington. Go down 95 a little bit, and there are a number of jurisdictions that are grappling with this issue on a regular basis. Probably you read about what was happening in Front Royal with the Samuels Public Library. They were defunded, but they did prevail. The community down there rallied and was able to stem the tide of book censorship. So that was at least a victory for today, for freedom to read and freedom of thought and freedom to be who you are. You asked about fiction. I would say that reading in general, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, gives us access to other stories, other perspectives, and that is so fundamental to what the library is about. Next year, I will have been in this profession for 50 years. Yeah.
It's impressive.
And it has never been more apparent to me that communities need libraries, schools need libraries, universities need libraries. We all need to be in touch with people who are different from ourselves, think differently, behave differently, show up differently. And do I agree with every single book or point of view that's presented in the collection of the library? No. A couple of times we've had to make decisions where I personally felt that the content was not representative of what I thought was appropriate, but there are standards and there are principles, and I can't have my way of thinking or belief system prevail over access to for the community of a variety of points of view. So this is one of those moments. A few weeks ago, the county board in Arlington declared Arlington Public Library to be a book sanctuary. That means we are protected from people deciding on their own what can and can't be included in the collection. People might say, oh, but that doesn't happen in Arlington. It does, and it can. And the county board standing up for us was a huge, huge step in affirming what we represent to the community. Freedom of thought, freedom to read, whatever you want, whenever you want, and however you want. So it's not just a nice thing to say, it's really taking a stand for the band, as I like to say. And we are leaning into that as both a system and individual librarians pretty heavily. So I do have a few banned book buttons. I'm wearing one today. Earlier this month, it was Banned Book Week. Banned Book Week is something that's celebrated, honored, recognized by the American Library Association every year. Now more than ever, we have to take a stand for reading, and it's fundamental, and it's something that's going to transform lives. So that's a very long answer. Yes, fiction is important, but reading in general and having the freedom to read is really the most important thing.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Corinne, you want to?
Beautifully said. I wanted to add, when we're talking about books and literature, we can't unpair that from the words and the language that we're being taught. And when we're talking about queerness and queer culture, we're talking about identity. We're talking about gender and sexuality and pieces of identity that are core to who we are. Leslie Feinberg, who's a trans activist author that has also been at it for 50+ years, has this beautiful quote, and Leslie says, "Gender is the poetry that we use with the language that we're taught." Right? So it's a poetry from the language that we're taught. So when we're talking about books and literature and words and learning new words and new identities and things like this, this is all so important because we use that information to build who we are. Yeah. So it's such an important, critical component of the conversation.
Thank you so much for that. I want to invite everybody to start thinking in the back of your mind, because I'm hoping to close out the panel by asking you to share a favorite queer story, movie, song. Like, just pick one that you can then, I'm sorry, Jay, I know, that you can recommend to folks as we finish. That's been helpful, transformative, important. You know, maybe you wrote it, I don't know, whatever. So we'll close out with that. You can be thinking about that. Corinne, I think to your point about language, right, and how important the words we use are, the words we even know are. I want to invite, maybe I'll ask Chaya if you would get us started in thinking about, as the parent of a trans kid, what were some of the resources that were helpful to you early on, before you became yourself a resource, as we have seen, right? What were some of the resources that were helpful to you as a parent, even to begin getting that language, and being able to use the language then to shape how you were a family together and how you were able to support your kid?
Thank you so much. Ironically, my son, who I assumed was my daughter up until they were 13, came out to me at the age of 13 as not my daughter, but rather my son. And his timing perhaps couldn't have been worse, because I was also going through a divorce. So I was a little shell-shocked, and in all honesty, this was several years ago. He's almost 26 now. He was 13. Does that mean it was 13 years ago?
Yeah.
If my math is correct?
It was
wow.
It was half his life, right?
Okay, and I'm
Yeah,
not a math person.
that.
Wow. I can't believe that. Wow, time flies. I didn't have any resources at the time. I didn't know of any resources. My mother told me about PFLAG. I went to some PFLAG meetings, and at that time, there were more parents of children, lesbian, gay, children who had different sexual orientations, not so much gender identity. And while there are some things that both communities have in common, there are also some things that the transgender community has that's vastly different. So I didn't feel like I had resources at the time. A couple years after my son came out to me, and I can say maybe this is somewhat of a shameless plug, because I did mention I'm on the board of directors for Transgender Education Association. Well, we have meetings that just so happen to occur on the second Friday of the month, which is why we call the meetings Second Fridays. And a couple of years, maybe a year and a half after my son came out, they started a parent group, a group of parent and guardians of gender expansive children. And if you can think of this group as a cohort, I was of the first cohort, and that group was vastly important to me, because when my son came out, I felt very alone. I did not know any other parents. of gender expansive kids. I only knew one transgender individual who is a trans woman who transitioned in her 50s, so her situation was very different from my son's. That group was monumentally important to me. So much so that when my youngest graduated from high school and flew the coop, I became the facilitator of the parents and guardians group. So again, we meet the second Friday of each month, and if anyone is interested in finding out more about those meetings, we do have a booth in the other room. Since then, however, I've also discovered and I'm a part of a lot of very private, closed Facebook groups for gender expansive, for parents of gender expansive children, not just in this area, but even I'm a part of a group in Minnesota because I have a lot of friends in Minnesota. You know, it's amazing. Thank goodness for organic growth, because that's where we share all the information. We find it out from other families. It tends to be, you know, there's no list of doctors who have practiced gender affirming care out there. We find out about it from other mothers and other trans kids like Evie and Evie's mom, who are here today. They hooked us into Dr. Fisher, and thanks to them, my son got his top surgery with Dr. Fisher. But really, truly, we just find out about it as fellow parents. And it would be nice if there would be something more organized, but I would encourage parents out there who have gender expansive children. First of all, one of the reasons why I facilitate my group is because I don't want any parent to feel as alone as I felt when my son came out to me. Because well, in addition to being shell-shocked, I mean, I had a lot of emotions behind it. I did know I was going to support my son no matter what, because as I told my now ex-husband at the time, when he said it was just a phase, I said, I don't know, but what I do know is I gave birth to this child, and this child's a part of me, and whether our kid be my son or my daughter, I'm never going to not support my child. I will always support my child.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. I think I answered.
No, that was great. That was
Okay,
great.
perfect.
Perfect. And I'm gonna, in a minute, so just be ready, Amy and Corinne, I'm gonna kick it over to our healthcare providers here to talk a little bit about what that's like. But first, I wanna see, Jay, if you would be willing to share, what do you wish, or what was helpful if Chai is talking about what resources she was hoping for, what would you wish where would you wish parents might go for resources when they've got a kid that comes out, and you know, maybe what was helpful in your family, anything you want to share around that?
Yeah, so when I came out, well, it's kind of a funny story how I came out, but I didn't know much about what my parents were doing at the time. I think what I kind of hoped for was just that it's the sort of hope that everyone will understand no matter what, and that everyone will automatically know. But obviously that's not the case. Like, no one's going to be able to read your mind. And so I kind of had to help them along the way a little bit. And I think every parent should just listen to their children and talk to them about what's going on. Even if at first it's awkward or hard, your children will eventually appreciate it. And I definitely think that some resources, like PFLAG and Ally and Smile is a great resource for kids. All of those have tables in the other room. But I think in general, it's just, even if it's just Googling things or talking to your kids, it's important to try and understand how your kids are feeling, but also to just listen to what they're saying.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, healthcare providers. What would you want both parents and teens who are advocating for themselves and for their own healthcare and health needs, mental health and physical health, what would you want them to be thinking about as they're looking for healthcare providers? As Chaya said, sometimes that's word of mouth even. Maybe there are some resources that are being built so that people can find queer and particularly trans-friendly providers. But yeah, Amy, do you want to kick us off maybe, and then Corinne?
This field is nascent. I made my own path. you and I were talking about that. Like, I was interested in this starting 10 years ago, working in the emergency room at Children's, noticed a lot of kids were gender expansive, and I needed to know more, and they weren't treated right by doctors. And so I was like, all right, well, it's my responsibility. And I just I stumbled around. I was lucky enough to meet Reverend Emma, who was like kind enough to take me under her wing. Went to some PFLAG meetings. I'm gonna give my book right now. It's Beyond Magenta. Is a oral history from 6 kids at the Boston Gender Program. Probably outdated, but oh my God, like ripped me by the heart into this world. And I was really happy to hear it from the kids. And that's a book I give to every parent who asks. It is still word of mouth. There is most of the work I do as a pediatrician, I put together, I found the groups. Not that I'm a hero, it's just that's what I'm interested in, and I followed what I was interested in, and there happens to be a need doing what I love, but it is word of mouth. And I showed up at this practice, and the board said, you're not gonna have any work, and within 6 months, I had a 4-week waiting list. So I think I send people to PFLAG, I send people to Reverend Emma's church.
And just for folks, Reverend Emma is the minister at in Arlington at a Metropolitan Community Church.
Fairfax.
Yeah? Fairfax, in Fairfax.
She's
Yes.
also the executive director of Transgender Education Association as well.
Thanks so much. Awesome. Thanks. Yeah.
And people cringe when they hear church, because gender expansive people cringe when they hear church, and I'm like, no, this is a UU church. This is not, we are the ones doing this work. But no, like the reason I don't have resources to give you is because there are no resources to give you.
Yeah.
And there are, again, nascent pieces being put together, but they are not easy to find.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, Corinne.
Yeah, I'll echo that. In the healthcare and mental health profession, it really is word of mouth. I opened up my own private practice focusing on gender expansive youth, and before I opened, my caseload was full because the people in our mental health community and in the healthcare community are working behind the scenes desperately to find each other and to do this work, because this is a point of passion for everybody for their own reasons, and it's so important, and it doesn't quite yet exist. It's there, but we're trying to build these bridges, and there's so many people doing that work so that we can ultimately have a bunch of resources to just say here. But right now, lean into the different communities that you do have. Another point I wanted to make, what Jay so eloquently talked about to parents specifically, like listen to your child. And that's so critical and so important. I can't stress that enough. And I want to introduce another caveat to encourage is some youth want to help you and teach you and educate you, and some youth don't, because it's just a personal preference that they don't want to take that on, that emotional labor for themselves. And also that's hard to know the words and the language to express and explain to you something that they might still be learning. I'm 42 and I'm still learning. So your 13, 14, 17, 8-year-old might not be the best person to chaperone you through this journey. And so take on that labor yourself. There are incredible services set up for that. My friend and colleague Heather Kirby right here, Kirby Creative Clinical Solutions, runs an incredible parent group, grandparent group, all kinds of different things. There's sources out there, so please educate yourselves as well as communicate openly with your youth. There's more that I was going to say, but
I'll come back to you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I'll
I just want to I want to just really reiterate that and to say, in addition to maybe not wanting to be the person who educates you, it's actually pretty sure that your youth does not want to be the person that holds your emotional processing, right? That's not the right place for it. So just again, like such a reminder of why some of these groups for parents are so important, because there may indeed be emotional processing to do, and so having it in a place where you can be held so that you can then hold your youth, your teen is so important. Chaya, you want to jump in there, and then I'm going to pivot and have us talk about school a little bit.
For anybody who's a writer and actually has time, I'm a frustrated writer who doesn't have time. I have thought for a while that we need something like the Green Book, but for the transgender community and families. Something that is put together that, and for those of you that don't know what the Green Book is, it was a kind of like a code book for African Americans during the civil rights movements of safe places to go. We need something like this for the transgender community and their parents. And boy, I wish I had the time to write it.
Okay,
Awesome.
yeah, there we
and
go.
I'd love to
Betsy's making
collaborate.
it.
I'd love to collaborate with
Awesome.
you when there's time. But yes, as everyone said here, it is so nascent that word of mouth still is the way most of us learn about things.
Yeah. Let's get some Excel spreadsheets going on, right? That's great. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about school.
Okay.
I would love for you to start us off, and then Jay, I'm definitely going to pitch it over to you to hear a little bit about your experience. To talk about what are some of the challenges that Arlington Public Schools has been working on to make movement through school life easier for queer and particularly for trans kids. What are some of the things Arlington Public Schools has been doing? Where do you still see challenges being held? What are ways that you've been able to support kids as they move through? Is that a good start?
We can give it a shot.
All right, great.
So I think there's several things that we have been doing to try to provide support. I mean, I'm very proud of Arlington Public Schools. I believe we were the first ones in the state that had an actual policy implementation procedure specific to how we were going to support transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary youth. So one of the key things, and research over 20 plus years now will tell this to you, is you've got to have the policies in place that affirm these students, you know, so that we have a non-discrimination policy that says very clearly that we don't discriminate based upon gender identity, sexual orientation. We have a policy implementation procedure which really guides our work to say, yes, students have the rights to use restrooms and locker rooms that correspond to their gender identity. We reaffirm that, you know, our LGBTQ plus students should not be bullied based upon their particular identities. We work to really try to create that environment and the affirmation of students in terms of being able to say, like, we will honor your identity within our schools, you know? We work, closely with some of the groups to sort of think about what are you hearing, because some things don't always come to us, they come to some of the community, and so we want to make sure that we're listening to that to help us, improve or really go back and think about, well, we said this or we tried this, but we've still got some work to do in these areas. So one thing that we've really heard from the community about was the concept of like dressing out for physical education for kids that, we've been working to accommodate specific requests within the boundaries of our policies, but also what about kids who maybe don't want to dress out or who don't feel like they have that place? And we have different schools that have different practices in this regards because of the facilities themselves. Like some of our schools don't have the space for students to change and dress out.
Dress out, you mean like
Put on it, change out of
like
your school
change into your
clothes
gym
and
clothes,
change into your
and then
your
change
gym
back
uniform.
into your
Right. So really working this year to put out to our communities and our schools to say, you know what you have to have for physical education are shoes and an ability to get active, because we do want to promote that physical activity for mental health, wellness, all those kinds of things, but we don't want the changing out to be a barrier for any student, and I think a lot in terms of, universally designed instruction that really comes from, the disability community, which is really thinking about how you design programming, academics, curriculum that meets the needs of all kids, but particularly, for students with disabilities. But what comes out of that is thinking what is helpful for students with disabilities actually benefits all of our students. And so some of these questions, we have students that may not be part of the LGBTQ plus identity groups, but for whom there were other things that were barriers for them in terms of changing out for PE, or other students who, for a variety of reasons, need access to broader restroom facilities than just the male, multiple restrooms, and female assigned multiple restrooms within there. And so some of these practices, I think, are good for all of our students. And when we employ them, we then don't have to have kids come to us and say, I need this, or families come to us and say, I need this.
Right.
When we can make some of these things just more available overall and give kids choices, then we don't have to have those conversations for kids that maybe aren't ready to have them yet, that aren't comfortable having them yet. It's just there and available, again, for any kid for any reason.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So Jay, I believe you've been to school
Yes, I have.
recently even.
Recently,
Yes, quite recently. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on your experience. What has been like maybe a win at school? Wow, that kind of went better than expected. What has been or continues to be a challenge that did not go the way I hoped? Maybe there was a miss between the policy that they had and how it was actually implemented or able to be implemented. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't actually go to Arlington schools. I go to Alexandria City Public High School, which is in Alexandria. And it's a huge school, which makes you think that there would be more opportunities for trans and gender expansive youth because there's so many, assumably, within the population. Right. But at my school, there are 2 gender neutral bathrooms right next to each other on the first floor. And this year, they are locked. And they have a big sign on them that says staff only. And I have to go to counselors to get keys for them every time I want to use the bathroom. So that's definitely a loss, in my opinion. Last year, I get that they might be trying to cut down on kids hanging out in the bathroom or whatever, but it really is negatively affecting gender expansive youth, in my opinion. As for a win,
It's okay if there hasn't been one.
yeah, I mean,
it's not okay, but
yeah.
yeah.
There is a GSA but there aren't really any good resources. I mean, most of my teachers have been cool. I was very lucky in that I transitioned right before high school, and so I was able to go into high school with no one knowing who I had been previously, no one knowing my birth name, anything like that. But for kids who are still transitioning in high school, it's a lot harder. And yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Let's see, I'm gonna throw this kind of open to whoever feels moved to answer. Imagine that a teen parent, pair system, units, parental units and teen, et cetera, or tween, right? Like a under 18 and the over 18 people that care for them. Are starting this journey. What would you hope that each of them is thinking about in terms of maybe mental health, maybe physical health, maybe this is the first thing, like what is on their first checklist of things that they need to start prepping or getting connected in with? Does that make sense? And I already see people leaning forward. Okay, great, yeah, super. Amy?
My first question is, do you have people? Like, who are your people? Mm-hmm. Who's got you? And, like, they don't have to be people in this community. They just have to be your people who love you even when you F up, and even when you cry, and even when you can see it coming, even when you have no idea what to do next. Who are your people? And I need you to have people.
Yep, thank you.
I think there's a couple of things that I would, just over years of experience, would sort of think you've got to have ready. So I think the people is important. I want to reiterate some of the things said earlier around that as, families, we know there was some great research that CDC pulled together with one of the more recent youth risk behavior surveys that our students who identify as trans, gender fluid, have more positive outcomes if they have family that are working to get on board, with those kids. We also have years and years and years and years of research that says that if you've got somebody at the school, if you're a youth, somebody at that school, an adult that you trust that affirms who you are, also going to mitigate some of those risk factors. So who are you as a student connecting with, in your school, in addition to your family that's a trusted adult? Who are you as parents connecting with? Because it is, I would say let's normalize like that. If this comes to you and it's very unexpected, it's normal that you're going to have some time to process feelings, thoughts, unclear what to say or do. You have to educate yourself very quickly, all of those things. And you need to minimize that, what you're feeling and showing in that regard as much as possible to your student who's looking for you to be the affirming parent that's going to love them, like you just said, like love your child no matter what. And then you are going and finding your people to go process this all with. I think that's pretty critical. The other thing I would say is, we need to work hard with our youth. For my dissertation research, I worked with elementary age students and their families, elementary students identified as transgender and non-binary, gender fluid, and it was constant for them the way they felt they had to be on and be educators for their families, for their peers, for their teachers.
These are like
for their
kiddos,
doctors.
to be clear. These were
I did
Yeah.
elementary because that's a big gap in the research, specifically, and these are little ones. These are like 9, 8, 9-year-olds who are wiser beyond their years because they have to, put words and tell people all sorts of things to help bring them along. And so where do families, how can they help to support? Where can school staff, where do we educate our staffs so that these kiddos don't have to do this all unto themselves?
Right. 9-year-olds are actually children, not educators, right? Yeah.
Right.
We hope they get to just be children.
In an ideal world, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the world we're trying to create here. I see. Yeah, Diane, you want to pop in, and then Corinne, I see you.
Thanks. I'll put another plug in for libraries and librarians. We have staff who identify as non-binary. We have staff who are gay. We have staff who have children who are undergoing some transitions. And so it's a safe place to not only get resources, but see and be around people who might be experiencing what you already have experienced or are about to. I think that over a certain age, you have your own library card. I think it's over, I think age 11 is when you can start using the library by yourself. And so if you're questioning, but you're not sure that your family is ready, you can certainly talk to the librarians and be given access to a lot of materials. I talked to a couple of parents earlier this morning, and am pleased that the Arlington Public Library provided a lot of resources, picture books and stories for children who were in that place of questioning, and fortunately the parents were supportive and willing to go on that journey with them. So I would say that to your point earlier about find your people, we can be part of that group of people, and we're still learning too, but with all of our facilities, we have the pride flag, we write columns for Coming Out Day, we have buttons that say protect trans youth. So we're trying to be both visibly supportive and welcoming, as well as through the content selections that we make for the collections. We are very, very interested in being part of the solution and the safety net for the community.
Thanks so much, Diane. Yeah, Corinne.
I think it's no coincidence that everybody that spoke to this issue already just now all talked about a similar thing, which is supports and creating space. It's it's generally well known and accepted now that we associate higher rates and risks of mental health concerns with LGBTQ plus youth, gender expansive youth, right? And that's not inherent to being gender expansive. That's inherent to going out into a world that you are well aware doesn't accept you. They might tolerate you. It is rarely celebrating you. That's critical to our mental health, right? So when we're talking about these people that come in and this adult and this youth, it's first and foremost important that everybody understands what we're addressing here. I get a lot of referrals as a psychologist from parents saying, hi, I have a child that's transgender. And I say, hi, I'm not hearing a mental health concern. Right?
Right, that's right. That is not a, yeah.
It sounds like you're having trouble with your child's identity or expression or curiosities, and I'm happy to set you up with an adult therapist that can work with you on that. If your child is looking for a space to talk, that's great. Let's give that space. Let's find these spaces. But that is a really, really critical component to sort of to untease there. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I'd like to add that for the parent-child grouping that you're suggesting, remember that first and foremost, our children are not just their gender identity. People are multifaceted, and we're not defined solely by our sexual orientation or gender identity. And I'm wearing a t-shirt, I'm very happy, I wear it to all my events, celebrate trans kids, because you know what? These are children who are gonna grow up and do wonderful things in our world. We need to celebrate all facets of these children. You know, some of them are gonna be scientists. Hey, we have somebody who was on the Harvard Olympic swim team, or the Harvard swim team, right? We have people in legislation in Delaware and in Virginia who are transgender, yes, Danica Rome, who are transgender. So we need to celebrate our children. And remember, one thing I tell parents is what's truly on the inside of our kids doesn't really change that much just because they've come out to us as gender expansive. So everything I loved about my daughter, I still see in my son. And everything that drove me mad about my daughter, I still see in my son, right? So what I tell parents is it's kind of like the wrapping paper's changed, but the gift that our children are to us is still the same. They are our gifts, and we need to, as parents, we need to support and encourage and foment the growth of our children because they are going to do great things in this world. I absolutely believe that.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, definitely. Amy, I'm going to come to you. I do want to just note and name that we're using parents as a kind of shorthand, and lots of times that might be other caregivers, that might be grandparents that are raising, that might be guardians, that might be older siblings, and so all of that applies, right? Where it's your units, your folks, whatever they are. Yeah, well, Amy.
Exactly to that point. I just did a presentation down in like the Children's Hospital King's Daughters down Norfolk Way. They asked me to talk at the beginning of school about Youngkin's policies. And my biggest point was that schools, libraries can be that safe place for the kid whose parents aren't supportive. And that's my problem with the new policies, is that, because I have plenty of kids, families who are not supported by their caregivers. TrevorProject.org came out recently with a survey. Like, go check it out, folks. That's such an amazing place. I get a lot of my quotes from there. Okay. They break it down by state to talk about not only like, here's the research and here's how each state is doing. Virginia fluffin stinks at this, you all, like, just for the record. But the thing that blows my mind, there's a quote that says, like, I always start with a slide that's basically like, gender expansive kids are 4 times as likely to consider suicide or attempt suicide than non-gender expansive kids. Like, I give all these like really grim statistics, but then the next one says, there's also the statistic saying that one adult can save a kid's life, and it doesn't have to be from their family. So that can be a doctor, that can be a therapist, that can be a neighbor, that can be a friend, that can be somebody else, right? But one adult saves these kids' lives.
Thanks so much, Amy. Jay, anything you want to add in there on that? I forget what my original question was, but it was like, family team comes forward. What should they be thinking about first? What's on their first checklist?
I feel like I already answered this,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, it's just you got to listen to them and you got to look for your supports. It really just everything everyone else said. I don't know if I have anything meaningful to add right now, but I just think that, yeah, it's really important, like Amy said, that one adult can save a kid's life. And I think I've seen that, and sometimes it's not even adults, sometimes it's it's peers.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen that over and over with kids whose parents aren't supportive. Having someone who supports them or a group of friends who supports them is so critical to them growing up and getting through whatever they're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that the concept that Amy just said of one person making a difference. So a year ago, Coming Out Day, I wrote a column that was presented in our newsletter and probably on our app, et cetera. And it was about my own journey and, standing up for who I am. I was in my 50s when I came out, so it's never too late. But it was obviously probably difficult for people who had known me most of my life. So I wrote the column. Fast forward, a couple days later, I got a handwritten note from a parent in the community saying her child was 11 and in a state of questioning, transition potentially, and how meaningful it was for a public official, a grown-up, to make an affirmative statement on behalf of, you be who you need to be. And so I have that note taped to my computer so that I see it every day as, yes, I made a difference potentially to that child and that child's parents. And that, to me, is worth just about everything and validates what I've spent my entire career doing. But it's really humbling when you feel that you've had that kind of impact.
Yeah. Corinne, yeah, please.
Real quick,
No,
I wanted
go for it.
to just say, one of the things that could be so helpful to walk through the world, sort of generalizing this information and knowledge, is not to apply it to only the people that you perceive as being within the gender expansive community. This applies to everyone. What you were saying earlier about the education system, this helps everybody. So don't spend time kind of memorizing people's pronouns that you know of. Start thinking about the way that we're using language. I've gone on a personal mission to just drop pronouns. I use people's names. 99% of the time, that's really all you need, right? So that I want to make sure I'm affirming people's gender identities if that's relevant to the person I'm talking to, but there are ways that you can carry out when you're talking to every single person in your life that supports the type of discussions and language and acceptance and affirming culture that we can use.
It's amazing how gendered languages, as I've started this journey as a parent, I've noticed, I go to a lot of events like today's event, and initially I was like, oh, I'm going to man a booth. at this Pride event. And I'm like, wait a minute, why?
Wait,
And
that
so
can't be
now I've
right.
changed it. I'm going to staff a booth.
Yeah, there you go.
I am, and now I'm still trying to find a substitute for like, oh boy, like when I'm just like, oh boy or oh brother. I'm trying to find a substitute for that.
Gee willikers.
Gee
That's what I like to-
willikers. Okay,
Gee
there you go. Gee
willikers.
willikers. Because it's amazing for a language, and I am a 22-year Spanish teacher. English doesn't have gender, but we have so many gendered terms that I'm trying to rid myself of to be more inclusive.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. It makes me think, actually, Corinne, about what you said at the very beginning around language really shaping the world, right? And so how are we able to shape the world so that nobody calls you just to say, oh, I'm calling a psychologist because my kid just came out as trans, right? Like that's actually not at all right. There's no need for a psychologist there. That's just part of the world that we live in. And yeah, like what? Yeah, like party planning. Did you want the party planning store? Yeah. So I'm going to wrap us up shortly. Before I ask you for your awesome story or song, I do want to take just a moment, and Amy, you lifted this up, right, around the country and in Virginia. We have laws moving forward, laws passed, right, that are seeking to move us backward, that are not seeking to build the kind of world that we are looking for. And I think we've heard a lot about some of the awesome ways that Arlington institutions and Fairfax and Alexandria and our, kind of bubble here are supporting. And even that is not perfect, as we have also heard, right? So even here, we're not there. But I just want to invite any reflection folks are doing. I know many of you work in advocacy arenas. What do you think people need to be paying attention to in Virginia? Where are our voices particularly needed right now, so that we can protect where we have moved forward in inclusion, celebration, the world that we are hoping for, and so that we can keep ourselves from moving backward? And I'll just throw that open to a couple folks, and then we'll get some celebratory stories in here. Yeah, Amy?
Most of my pro bono work is in teaching the language around LGBTQIA. Anytime someone asks, I'm talking about gender expansive language, because I think lack of familiarity is what stops so many, like fear is what stops so many people from engaging. And if I can take a tiny little piece and also show them that I mess up too, and show them what to do when you mess up, like I feel like that, like pulling down the barrier is kind of how I work.
Yeah, live it out loud just wherever you go. Yeah, absolutely. Other things that folks are watching and working for?
Vote, please.
Vote.
And examine those candidates and see if they are going to stand for the values that you stand for. We have made a lot of progress in Virginia, and I am fearful that we are starting to slide back. We are very fortunate that we get to vote every year in Virginia, so please go and vote.
Local elections are important.
And you can still vote early. You haven't missed that deadline. I voted yesterday.
Just go vote right now, as soon as no, don't.
But when you say, local elections, yes,
Yes.
especially school boards.
Yes.
And regardless of where we may be in Arlington, there are people across the state, so it's important to help people across the state as well. Postcards, phone calls, texting, it's super easy with all the tools available, and we are a couple of votes shy of being a conservative minority in all of the levels of government in the state. So if that matters to you, there are opportunities to do something about it. So I echo what you're saying. Vote, but get active.
Yeah, and actually I would just add, if you are looking for those opportunities, this congregation has a voting rights team that sends postcards. We have like packets, you just pick them up, the stamps are in them, super easy. So reach out, you don't have to be part of the congregation to participate in that. We're always happy to have more people writing postcards. Corinne?
And just normalizing normalizing it in conversations, right? When you go home today and somebody says, "What'd you do today?" Tell them what you did, right? This was an important piece of a conversation, and I think we tend to sort of focus what we talk about, and depending on who we're talking to. Let's talk about it all the time, in any situation. Even if it might make it uncomfortable, find a way to tailor it to, you don't have to always walk around being uncomfortable, but find a way to help normalize this. This is just a quick little anecdote that's important that a lot of mental health providers use. Years ago, being left-handed was somewhat unheard of, statistically very, very minimal, right? And then it sort of, over time, became okay and even embraced to be left-handed, and then the population of left-handed people almost doubled, if not
It's
tripled.
such a trend, left-handedness.
Yeah.
What?
Trend setting, right? And yeah, did more people start being born left-handed? No, it just became okay. And then so everybody came out as left. Now it's not a big deal. That's what we're talking about here. Let's create a community and a culture where it's just okay. And that's why we're seeing numbers going up. That's what we want everybody here. We might be preaching to the choir literally and figuratively right now, but we want everybody to be talking about this, normalizing it, and making it a part of everyday conversations.
100%. That's awesome. Thank you all so much for that. So I do want to end with a celebratory space, right? Actually, when you were talking about dressing out, I was like, is that when you get to like dress extra queer? Is that no, that wasn't what you meant. But with that in mind, right? Like that we've talked a lot about support and resources, about times when there's emotions to process and the spaces where parents can go to process those emotions. And all of those things are real. We've talked about some of the challenges coming up and coming along in the state and in the country. And we've talked about the need to really be celebratory, right? That this is actually a congratulations space. I hope that this space is a congratulations space for all that we are all becoming. So this is your story, song, movie moment. To suggest to folks something that you would invite them to read, listen to, watch, that you've loved, that's been important, transformational, celebratory for you.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So there's a book called Hope Punk, like HOPEPUNK. I picked it up from my school library, actually, on a whim, and I read it and I fell in love with it. The characters are so vibrant, and the story is just, it really appealed to me in a lot of ways. And while the main character isn't queer, the character's sister and best friend are both queer, and it revolves around a lot of like acceptance, and it's just a really good book. I recommend it to everyone I meet. I think it's absolutely one of my favorites.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jay.
So I already told you about Beyond Magenta, but I will also throw up, not really. I will also throw out a group that my youngest got me hooked on, which is Rainbow Kitten Surprise. And I challenge you to look up a picture of the band while you're listening, because because the lead singer came out as trans. And I love listening to her sing while having her in my head, because I think that's one of the things we gotta get over. Rainbow Kitten Surprise. And my favorite is Goodnight Chicago.
And it's a band.
It's
Rainbow
a band.
Kitten
It's a
Surprise,
Rainbow
the
Kitten
band.
Surprise is a band, and my favorite song right now from that band is Goodnight Chicago.
Thanks, Amy. Awesome.
So I've got two because I talk too much. One, I want to do a plug for a book that's coming this summer. We've talked a lot about normalizing culture. We've talked a lot about building awareness in communities. The Trans Anthology Project, and there's a booth for it right over there if you guys take some time after this to go check it out. Stories from trans youth, non-binary youth, gender expansive youth, and stories from their parents, right? Nice. These are real, even mostly local community stories to enrich the conversation. So I can't plug that enough. Heather Kirby's responsible for that. The other one for me personally in my journey is a fairly recent book written by a trans man, Devin Price. It's called Unmasking Autism. I can hear some fist pumps in the background. Awesome. This is a book about gender expansiveness. It's a book about autism. Those of you who don't know, upwards of 70% of the LGBTQ plus community is neurodivergent. And so it's an important conversation to include. So Unmasking Autism, an incredible read.
Awesome, thank you.
I have two, but I'll keep it short. Becoming Nicole. which is a story about Nicole Maines, who is ironically from Maine, the state of Maine. But it basically gives her journey from birth through, not until she got into Hollywood. So the author stopped, the author published the book before then, but just for those of you who don't know, Nicole Maines is an actress. I believe she's in the show Supergirl. Not my genre of show, but the book was fantastic. Talked about the legal aspects, talked about the prevailing medical theories about why somebody might be transgender. And then, I just finished it last night, I will admit, the 4th season of Sex Education on Netflix was so awesome. There were so many genderqueer characters and characters that were exploring their gender identity, and it was really, really positive. I was very pleased with it. In fact, I was like literally tearing up in some spots.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
It's an academic text, so I preface that, but there's a great book by Dr. Jules Gills-Peterson, who I believe is at Hopkins now. I think they were at UPitt maybe before, but it's about the history of the transgender child, and I think it helps to sort of counter some of the perceptions that this is a new thing, first of all, and I think it really goes in to talk about how, how there's so much in history that, confuses sexual orientation and gender identity, and then sort of how the medical model of gender identity, has some challenges in and of itself. But it goes into, there are some very powerful stories within the book itself of, people in the US who, like in the 1910s, 1920s, were, openly trans and accepted by the communities in the schools and just sort of went through, life at that point. To really indicate that this is something that's been going on since the dawn of time. We in sort of Western culture, have espoused or socially constructed these male-female binaries, but there are lots of other cultures in history or even in current times where that's not all that's available, even in terms of language or expression. So I really appreciate, sort of this really full, rich text that walks you through all of these different ideas, and helps to kind of normalize, not just in our current time, but over time, how gender has been and has always been expansive within our society.
That's awesome. What's the title of that book?
History of the Transgender Child.
That was the title, History of the Transgender Child. Awesome. Okay.
Okay. So, books.
Uh-oh. You know nothing about them.
I know nothing about them. So I'm going to go with Alison Bechdel's Fun Home graphic novel. When I came out in my early 50s, my older son gave me a copy, which was his way of acknowledging, it's okay, Mom, you're still Mom. It's a terrific story. It's a family memoir about a father who's dealing with his own sexuality and as his daughter is coming out. And if you have never read it, it's terrific. It was also an Tony Award-winning musical from a few years ago, which Studio produced this year. I interviewed Alison in March as part of our graphic novel series. It was a great conversation, but the best moment came was when she told me I was her new fashion model.
Oh my gosh.
So, but anyway, and then for a quote, I'm going to go kind of old school. It's by George Eliot. It's never too late to be who you were always intended to be. That's resonates with me for a lot of reasons, and plus it's yay literature, yay books that are super long. But anyway, thank you.
I think we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much to our panelists. Really appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Good. Thanks.
Thank you. A lot of fun.
I feel like a slug next to you with all that you do.
Well, I don't do it all at once, like, now I'm not,